Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Wildwood Tarot, and today I thought I would do a fun little video that I'm going to call hashtag deck mod fails, because I would love to encourage anybody else who's had this experience to go ahead and share their stories with us, because a lot of times, at least I know on my channel, like I show a lot of deck mods because modification is kind of a part of my tarot practice. It's a lot of the times how I connect with the deck. It's definitely how I make decks work better for me. A lot of times it's all about taking a very large deck that I cannot get my hands around or cannot shuffle and taking it down to something that is smaller that I can actually work with. But that doesn't always go the way I want it to or the way that I hope it will. So I just thought I would share a couple of my completely epic deck mod failures. These are all decks that I'm going to probably try to fix at some point or another. So maybe we'll see that in some upcoming videos if you guys are interested. But I just wanted to share a couple of them because I just wanted everybody to know that not every deck mod goes according to plan, and not every deck mod turns out the way you hope it will. So let's talk about my first deck mod, and I might have shown these in a couple of other videos in terms of deck modification. So if you've seen them before, I apologize, but I just thought I would share my experiences with some of the decks that I have attempted to mod. So the very first deck that I ever modified is the Crystal Visions Tarot, and this deck, I think it actually looks really good until you look at it real close up. So a couple things that I did wrong with this deck. And let's be honest, a couple things I did right. The main thing that I did wrong with this deck, other than not using measurements, because like I said, this was the first deck I ever modded, so I didn't use measurements. I had a much kind of flimsier trimmer at the time, so even trimming it was kind of a bit of an issue. My corner rounder was I can't even remember. I think it was one of the Fisker's corner rounders, which I do not use and I do not recommend. Like, I love their trimmers, but their corner rounders are terrible. This was before I discovered my Katamaro Pro, so anyway, my corner rounder didn't actually round the corners. It kind of just ate them up. So some of the corners are round and some of them are, I don't even know if you can see it, but they're like, I don't know, they have divots in them. They're chewed up. This one has a big dent in it, a big cutout here in the corner. So the corners are just, they're a hot mess. I think the trimming in terms of taking the borders off and just leaving the titles on went really, really well. But the corner rounding, not so much. Now, granted, that is something I can totally fix with my new corner rounder. I may need to give it a little trim to get things straight again. That's something that I could totally do, of course, because when your cards aren't straight, if you don't get a nice kind of straight 90-degree angle, it's not gonna fit in your corner rounder very well, regardless of what corner rounder you have. Like, it needs a pretty good straight angle in order to actually work in there, because that's how they work, right? Okay, so one of the things that I did with this deck that I actually really enjoyed is that I added paint to this deck. And I'm gonna try to bring it in and hopefully it'll pick up. I added pearlescent paint, and quite a bit of it, to most of this deck. I added paint in all of the whites, the pearlescent. I do have a video on how I do this process. It's in my Druidcraft one, which is a deck I'm still working on. But I added basically, let me just pull a couple of them up here. Maybe that will work better. So I added pearlescent paints, and I'm not sure if they will pick up here because I also have a spray coat over the top, which we'll talk about that here in a minute. I don't know if it'll pick up, but can you see how the white is kind of shimmery? Because that's all pearlescent paint that I have taken and added to it. I added pearlescent purples and pinks, lots of whites, some oranges, some golds. This is one of my favorite ones. I don't know if it'll show up, but there's pearlescent paint all in the C down here, pearlescent paint all in the lightning bolts, in the birds. There's gold all in the tower. So I don't know if it picks up on camera or not, but that is One of my favorite things about this deck, so I do need to take the time to kind of clean it up and fix it up, because I did that to every card, all 78. It was a really fun process. It was very time consuming, very tedious, but you know, I just did it a couple cards at a time. I think I did it over the course of a summer, and it was a lot of fun, and it was a wonderful way for me to add my own sort of energy and my own touch to this deck. The problem then, so because I added paint to it, whenever I went to shuffle it and actually work with it, the paint would make the cards stick together because there was a layer on top of it. And so I thought, well, I'll just cover it with some clear coat spray, right? Great idea. Probably would have worked fine if I hadn't been quite so heavy-handed with it. I don't know if it'll show up on this one, but this one is all kinds of bubbled because I got way too much paint or way too much sealant on there. Probably should have done just one layer. Here's a couple of really good ones. Probably should have just done one layer. Let me bring them up in here. Maybe you can see it. Can you see all of that bubbling? Yeah, that's not supposed to be there. I did that on accident. Probably should have used multiple light coats rather than one heavy one. And I hadn't worked with spray sealant for a very long time or clear coat in many, many years. And I wasn't accustomed to working with it again. If I were to do it again, which I will with my Druid craft when I get done painting it, because you almost have to, you have to cover the paint with something. Otherwise it sticks and then it'll start to chip off. And clear contact paper would probably also work, but I do really like the clear coat sealant because it's not, there's no lip or anything, right? There's nothing to catch. Sometimes with the clear contact paper, that can catch and it can, you know, start to peel up. And I've had that happen a couple of times with some decks. Particularly if you rifle shuffle a deck that's covered in clear contact paper, sometimes that doesn't always work out the best. I really like the clear coat spray because it makes the cards nice, and I used it like a semi gloss on this one, so it feels fairly similar to the back of the card, and it makes a nice surface for working with. You can also wipe it off, which is nice, but I just was too heavy-handed with it, I think, and it just kind of glopped on there in some ways. But I spent a lot of time repainting this deck, so that part of it went really, really well. The actual trimming, corner rounding, and then the clear coat on the fronts, not so much. So this one is kind of like maybe a half fail because the painting came out great, which I really, really liked. And I still do really, really like, but the rest of it, not so much. So that's one of my fails for the most part. However, the painting of it was really awesome. I do have to say with the clear coat and the paint, this deck is actually quite heavy now. It's a bit misleading. You pick it up and you think it's going to feel like the same as a normal deck, but it actually doesn't. It's quite heavy, which is kind of funny. So that is my deck mod fail number one. The next deck mod that I completely bombed at is trimming and rebacking my Wildwood Tarot. Again, this is pre-measurement days, so the cards are not even. I did better on the top and bottoms than I did on the sides. The sides are really bad. The other thing that I did, the main problem, I did take all the titles off of it, and the artwork looks great like this. But the other thing I did was I rebacked it, because when you trim this deck, if you trim it down according to the front and just take off the artwork, it leaves white stripes along the back of the deck. And I don't think I have one that has, no, they're all covered. It leaves white stripes on the back, which I didn't like. So I thought, well, I'll cover it. I ordered this contact paper, which said it was like natural wood looking. I got it off Amazon. Yeah, it looks nothing like natural wood. And I paid like, I want to say like 15, 20 bucks for this contact paper. Like, it wasn't cheap. The $6 contact paper, wood grain contact paper that I picked up at Walmart works way better than this stuff does. So I don't even know what it is anymore. I wouldn't recommend it. It's very cheesy looking. It doesn't look like wood at all. And it sticks really bad. The other thing that I did wrong with this particular deck is that this particular contact paper shrinks, and I didn't know that this was a thing. It not just with decks, but it's a thing with contact paper in general until I started to look into it, because after like a couple of days or so, I was like, why is there green edges all along my decks in the top and bottoms? There's basically a green micro border around this card, around all the cards, where the contact paper has completely shrunk down. It was full size, fit the card, covered the card beautifully when I started, and after a few days it shrunk. And apparently that's just the thing that happens with contact paper. Maybe do a quick search and see if anybody has mentioned anything about shrinkage, because this deck pretty much shrank. Now, the fact that it shrank also means that as it shrank, it left a sticky residue on the exposed parts of the card. So now the deck completely sticks together and clumps like really bad. So this deck is pretty much unusable. I did try, there is one card missing from this deck because I did try to remove this contact paper. It is permanent. It's not removable, which in general you don't want removable if you're going to use it on the back of your cards, right? Because removable will eventually come off. It'll lift up. And in fact, the decks that I've done with removable contact paper, my Mary L is one I'm thinking of. I didn't realize it was removable, and I had to actually glue down all the corners. So that was, I guess, could kind of be considered a little bit of a fail, but I did end up being able to fix it. But maybe see if I can get it off. While it kind of comes off, sometimes it doesn't, because there is one card missing from this deck that it took the whole backing off of it. But it's leaving a residue, basically, and look at how it warped the card, me trying to take that off. So yeah, that's like a no-go. I mean, it's not like a super expensive deck, and I have another copy of it because I actually traded for another copy of it. So I do have another copy of this deck, and I do intend to trim it. So you can see here, when you trim along to the front, it leaves a micro white border on the top and the two sides, which is not straight. Again, I trim a little bit more meticulously now. So the second time I trim this, or the next time I trim this, it'll probably go a lot better because I am going to be a little bit more mindful about how I trim it. But this deck, yeah, I see it's all kinds of sticky. This deck was like an epic fail all the way around. So everything I did with this deck was a fail. I used distress ink stamp to edge it in, and as the stickiness has rubbed off from card to card, it's pretty much started to take that off as well. So Wildwood Tarot, my other completely epic deck fail. So my third deck mod fail is my Wisdom Seekers Tarot. This one is, this is the newer version. It before was called the Wisdom Seekers, or no, sorry, before it was called the Truth Seekers, and I think there was even another name for it before that. I really love this deck in terms of the artwork, and I'm a little bit sad about what I did to it, to be perfectly honest with you. This deck has very thick cardstock, like really, really thick. It's very cardboardy. I would love to know if the other editions, because this is the Wisdom Seekers, if the other editions have the same cardstock, or maybe I need to try to get a hold of a older edition. But what I did to this deck was, first of all, I trimmed it. Again, if you can see how wonky it is, not using measurements. Because again, this was my pre-measurement time, and so it's all different sizes that I could totally fix up. The problem I had with this deck is the cardstock was so thick that even with, I had my Katamaro at that time, I basically almost broke my hand trying to corner round this deck. My corner rounder, it was a brand new one, it just didn't want to cut the deck. It took me several days, and I kid you not, it hurt my hand so bad. It took several days for me to quarter around this deck because I had to do a couple cards at a time and basically put it away. I don't know what the deal was. I don't know if I just had a bad corner punch, although I think I used it for quite some time on other decks. So I don't know if it was a bad corner punch or what the deal was, or just because the cardstock is thick. I feel like I've trimmed decks that are this thick before, but maybe not. Anyway, so my corners are all kinds of jagged. It almost broke my hand, and it kind of broke my spirit for wanting to work with this deck because, to be perfectly honest with you, I was like mad at it. I was seriously mad at this deck by the time I was done corner rounding it, which is just ridiculous because this deck did nothing to me, right? I did it to the deck. Maybe it was just mad I took its borders off. I don't know. I think it looks amazing borderless. I love it like this. It's like a storybook. And as I'm looking through it now, I'm thinking, okay, I need to get this deck back out and I need to show it some love. But that's not the only place I went wrong with this deck. Then I thought, so in the older editions, everywhere you see gold, that was like stamped gold. So it was like the reflective, kind of like the Victorian romantic. And it looks so pretty. Mine did not have that. So the Wisdom Seekers, they didn't do that on this particular edition. So I got a metallic marker and I sat over the course of, I don't know, a day or two. And I colored in all of the spaces that I knew were supposed to be that reflective. And that really, I mean, it went okay, except for I think my marker was too fat and I lost a lot of the detail on particularly the sword suit and some of the wands. And it just didn't come out quite as nice as I really wanted it to. And again, I think that's because my marker was just, it was too fat. I should have had a thinner tipped marker if I was going to do something like that with it. Again, this was kind of in my early deck mod days. This was my early YouTube days too, because I think one of my first videos I ever did was talking about this deck because I love this deck. I think it's a completely underrated deck. It's very pippish. The book and the deck really don't match up, but that's okay. I love the deck. It's like stepping into a storybook. I think it's so wonderful. I love the majors in it. I think they're so dreamy. And to me, this deck is really like stepping into a storybook, which I really, really love. But I kind of killed some of the details in it by using basically the wrong type of marker on it. So knowing what I know now, I would have gone with a thinner tipped gold metallic marker. The other thing that I did was I used a bronze Sharpie to edge the deck, and it, bled onto the back as Sharpie does. These backs are just, what is this? I don't even know what this is. And I would have rebacked this deck, but then, oh my goodness, they would not be able to bend them at all if I rebacked it, right? So, yeah, these decks or these backs are just completely uninspired. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but I'm sure that this artist could have created a beautiful back, but that just didn't happen. So anyway, I got some bleed on the back, which, it's not my favorite. I also, because I bought a new bronze Sharpie to do this deck in, and it didn't even make it through one whole pass of the deck. It started drying out to the end, toward the end, and I didn't get full coverage. From a distance, it kind of looks kind of neat. It's like kind of antique-y. Up close, you can just see that it's just white card coming through. So anyway, just another one of my deck mod fails. I mean, this one is totally like a usable fail. This is not usable anymore. I've destroyed this deck. But I look at this deck as this was my practice deck. This was the deck that the very first deck I ever did with contact paper. So it was a learning experience, and that's okay. I mean, we all have to have those learning experiences. Now I know better. I know other things to do. So all of these decks that I'm talking about today were all some of my very first mods that I did. And so they were all learning experiences. And I think it's really important to make sure that your learning experiences are on decks that you're okay with either chucking aside if it goes horribly wrong, or trying to fix up, or replacing if need be if it goes horribly wrong. I would never have modified any of my indie decks the first few times out that I was learning to modify decks, because it's kind of a learning process, right? You have to learn you have to learn the process. You have to learn your tools. Every tool is different. And I still learn every time I use a new medium, like for on an edging, I'm still learning. So I think it's just important to point that out. But anyways, Wisdom Seekers Tarot, another deck mod fail. A more recent deck mod fail is the new Paladini Tarot. And I think I have talked about this one in another video. I think it was on my like decks I'm going to mod, my deck mod to-do list or something like that, which I probably should do another one of those. This is a salvageable fail. So I'm just going to preface by saying that. This originally had, you can kind of see here, titles at the bottom. I believe it had a white border. So I do have an extra card in here. So the backs look like this with a white border, which is, I don't know, was totally fine. And the fronts had the white border, and then they had the title at the bottom. And I thought this deck would look really cool, completely borderless, because I think the artwork is really neat. So this one, while it looks okay now, and I need to finish it, couple of things with this one. I had to trim this deck like, I don't know, 3 or 4 different times to try and get it straight. Again, this was pre-using my measurements, and had I used measurements, I would have caught the discrepancies in the placement of the artwork prior to chopping into the cards, but I wasn't doing that at the time. So yeah, I ended up, and I can see border left over where, you know, there shouldn't be. But anyway, this was pre me using measurements, and I ended up like trimming this deck like 4 times, trying to get it straight, trying to get the borders completely off. And I mean, I did fairly okay considering I didn't use measurements, but it took me like seriously 4 tries, 3 or 4, I want to say, like to the point where I was just like, again, kind of like my Wisdom Seekers, I was mad at the deck and I was disgusted with it. And I turned it around and went, that looks ridiculous. Like, oh my goodness, what did I do? What did I do to this poor deck? I should have just left it alone. And I will be the first to admit that there are some decks that I probably should have just left alone. There are some decks that I wish I had, this being one of them, or really, I guess this is really the only deck that I wish I would have left alone. But, you know, sometimes that happens. Things don't always work out the way you think they're going to, and sometimes you look at it and you go, oh my goodness, what did I do? Because this looks ridiculous. Look at this back now. I don't even look at the backs most of the time on my cards, but just knowing that it's there bugs the crap out of me. So then I was like, okay, I can salvage it. I can just reback it. But then I look at this and go, do I want to reback it? Because wow, that turned out to be a hot mess. While I have rebacked other decks since then, this one has kind of just been hanging out waiting for me to reback it. I did buy some black marble contact paper to reback it in, and I just haven't gotten around to doing it, so maybe that's something that I will try to get done. That's the reason I haven't corner rounded it yet, because once I flipped it over and was like, oh my gosh, I ruined the backs, I knew I had to fix it in some way. For this one, I mean, this is totally a salvageable deck, but to be completely honest with you, I had to put it away for a while because I was mad about it. You know, it took me forever to get it down to just this square size. It's still not right. I don't know why it didn't occur to me to use measurements back then, but it didn't, and now I know better. So this is why this and this and this and this is why I am so adamant about my measurements now, because, you know, mistakes happen, things happen, and when I don't use measurements, I feel like I don't have as much control. And so that really is why I'm kind of a stickler about it now. But so these are kind of my really, you know, kind of epic deck mod fails. I have some minor ones here and there that I'm like, I don't really like that color. Let me just show you here. This is the new Liminal Tarot, and I trimmed it all down. to just the artwork, which I think looks really cool. It did have the white borders at the top and bottom, and I was going to do this as a mod with me, but the video didn't kind of come out the way I wanted it to. So while I think the fronts look really great, this one I did use measurements on, so it's really quite even and all of that. Where I kind of went, I don't like it, is the sides that I did. So I divided the deck into half, because I don't know if you can tell here, but about half the deck is yellow, has a very yellow tone, and about half the deck has a very blue tone. And so I divided it in half, and I did half the deck in yellow and half the deck in blue, and I just don't think it really matches, is really all it comes down to. The backs are black and white. It looks weird on the sides, and so it's not like a fail, because for one, I can always re-edge this deck, and I'm thinking I'm just going to re-edge it in black and call it good, although there's not a ton of black in this deck, which was why I didn't do it in black at the first time around, because if you look at it, there's really not any black. And I thought, oh, maybe I could do brown, but it just, I don't know. That's one that it's not a fail. I just don't like it. Like, I just don't like the way it turned out. So I do have some decks like that where I'm like, I'm just not thrilled with the color. And I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have done that. For the most part, when it comes to like edging, you can usually change the color. You can always go over it, particularly if you're going from lighter to darker. Black will cover up just about any multitude of sins in terms of your edging. So anyway, that is a look at my deck mod fails. I just thought it would be fun to show you kind of some of the decks that didn't quite turn out the way I wanted them to. So I hope you enjoyed this look at my deck mod failures. If you have had any failures of your own, I encourage you to use the hashtag deck mod fails. Share with us, let us know your experiences, because I think we learn as much from the things that don't go well as the things that do. So I thought I would just share with you my experiences and some of the things that I've learned along the way, and I would love to hear what you've learned along the way. So either make a video or leave it in the comments below. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.